My name is Celeste Harrington, 38 years old. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, and by now it felt personal, like the sky itself was mourning. Each drop drummed against the tall windows of Greenwood Funeral Home, sharp and relentless, matching the hollow rhythm of my breaking heart. The air smelled of damp earth and lilies, heavy with grief. Inside, silence hung between whispered condolences, broken only by the shifting of chairs and the muffled sobs of family members. 2 mahogany caskets stood side by side, polished so well they caught the reflection of the dim chandelier above. My parents, my anchors, gone within days of each other. Mom's cancer had drained her slowly, stealing her laugh one day at a time. Dad's heart gave out 3 days later. The doctor called it medical inevitability, but I knew better. My father simply couldn't live without her. He didn't want to. I stood at the front in my black dress, hands gripping tissues that had long since lost their use. Beside me, my children pressed close. Kimberly, my 16-year-old, fought for composure, but streaks of mascara betrayed her brave front. Eric, 14, clenched his jaw so tightly it reminded me of my father's stubborn expression. And little Sharon, just 8, clutched her stuffed rabbit as if it were the last safe thing in her world, whispering questions I couldn't answer. Around us, people murmured stories about my parents' lives. 47 years of marriage, Sunday dinners, the way Mom could turn scraps into feasts, Dad's tireless work at the mill. Their legacy was devotion, the kind of love people envy but rarely find, a love that endures. I tried to focus on those words, but all I felt was absence, an echoing void where my parents' laughter should have been. And then Martin leaned closer. My husband of 18 years, the man who'd once sworn to love me through sickness and health, through joy and sorrow. His breath was warm against my ear. I want a divorce, Celeste. It's over. For a heartbeat, the world froze. The rain outside silenced, as if the storm itself paused to hear his betrayal. My blood ran cold, and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I thought I had misheard, that grief had warped his words. Slowly, I turned to look at him. His eyes, cold, gray, detached, met mine without a flicker of regret. No tenderness, no hesitation. Only impatience. As though my parents' funeral was a nuisance keeping him from something more important. What did you say? My voice was barely a whisper, trembling. You heard me. He straightened his tie, the silk one I had bought him for our anniversary years ago. We'll discuss the details when we get home. Try to keep it together for the kids. And then he walked away, just like that, as if he had commented on the weather, not detonated my world in the middle of my parents' burial. I stood frozen, surrounded by mourners who were paying respects to my parents, oblivious that my husband had just gutted me. A double grief wrapped around me like a shroud. My parents were gone, and now, in the same breath, so was my marriage. Kimberly slipped her trembling hand into mine. Her eyes were wide, searching my face. Mom, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I had. The ghost of the man I thought I married. The ghost of the life I thought we had built together. Across the room, Martin shook hands with my uncle, smiling that perfect practice smile he wore in courtrooms and client meetings. To everyone else, he looked like the devoted husband standing by his grieving wife. Only I knew the truth. Only I knew the venom he had whispered into my ear. Time to strike when I was most defenseless. Something dark and sharp pressed against my chest, replacing what little warmth I had left. Betrayal has a sound. It's the echo of a coffin lowering into the ground, while the person beside you decides your love story is finished. Martin thought he had chosen his moment wisely, that in my devastation I wouldn't have the strength to fight back. He thought grief would silence me. But Martin had forgotten something. He had forgotten who I was beneath the shattered daughter, beneath the obedient wife, beneath the mother, barely keeping it together. I was my father's daughter, and my father had taught me that sometimes the only way to survive a predator is to become one yourself. The rest of the funeral blurred, like a nightmare replaying behind fogged glass. Pastor Paul spoke about my parents' devotion, their kindness, their unwavering loyalty. Each word felt like salt in the wound because the man standing behind me had just spat on everything they embodied. As people lined up to offer hugs and whispered prayers, I stood numb, clinging to my children as though they were the only proof I had left that I was alive. Martin hovered near the door, shaking hands, thanking people for coming. while keeping his phone in his other hand, already distracted, already gone. When it came time for the burial, the sky stayed heavy with gray. I stood between Kimberly and Eric, holding Sharon in my arms because she refused to let go. My siblings gathered around. The caskets descended, ropes creaking as they lowered into the earth. Dirt hit the wood with dull, final thuds. Each sound shattered another piece of me. Kimberly wept softly. Eric's tears slid silently down his face, and Sharon buried her face into my shoulder, wailing for her grandmother. Martin stood apart, checking the time on the watch I had sacrificed months of work to buy him for Christmas. Detached, impatient, as if even this moment bored him. That was when I felt it, something inside me breaking. Not just my heart, but my illusions. The version of myself who believed in his promises was buried in that cemetery too. As we turned to leave, Martin stepped close again, his hand resting on my shoulder for show. To anyone watching, it looked like comfort, but his grip was cold, mechanical. He had calculated this moment, waiting until I was broken, waiting until the earth itself was swallowing my parents, to deliver his killing blow. And yet, as his hand fell away, I realized something he hadn't. This wasn't the end of me. It was the end of him. He just didn't know it yet. After the funeral, I lay awake that night in the emptiest bed I'd ever known. The guest room door clicked shut down the hall. Martin had made good on his cold declaration, and for the first time in 18 years, silence spread between us like a chasm. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every word, every gesture, every year of our marriage, searching for where it all went wrong. And inevitably, my mind drifted back to the beginning. I was 25, fresh out of my master's program in psychology, working at a community center in downtown Chicago. Back then, I was the kind of woman who believed in people, who thought love could fix what was broken if you gave it patience and care. That was when Martin walked into my life. He was 32, a rising star at Mitchell & Associates, one of the city's most prestigious law firms, the kind of man who turned heads without trying. He had this way of looking at you, his intense gray eyes locking on as if you were the only person in the room. I remember him leaning against the center's reception desk, smirking like he'd already won something. "You're different," he told me on our third date, fingers brushing mine across a candlelit table at Romano's. "Most women just want to talk about themselves, but you actually listen. You care about things that matter." I had believed him. I had wanted to. At 25, his words were a lifeline, validation that who I was, this earnest, eager woman, was enough. 2 years later, I walked down a makeshift aisle in the garden of my parents' house. Mom cried through the ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with tissues she kept pulling from her purse. Dad whispered in my ear as he gave me away, his voice thick. He better take care of my little girl, or he'll answer to me. For a while, Martin did. We bought our first house together, a modest 3-bedroom colonial with peeling shutters and creaking floors, but it was ours. We spent the first summer painting it white with blue trim. At night, we'd collapse on the porch, covered in flecks of paint, drinking cheap wine and talking about the future. We dreamed of kids, vacations, maybe even buying a cabin by the lake someday. When Kimberly was born, I left my job at the community center. Martin had insisted it would be better for the baby if I stayed home. "A mother's love can't be replaced," he'd said, kissing my forehead as I rocked our newborn daughter. Back then, it felt noble, like a sacrifice made for love. Eric came 2 years later, all elbows and boundless energy. Sharon was our surprise baby, born when I thought we were finished. Each child brought chaos and joy, and each time I threw myself into motherhood with the same intensity I had once given my work. For a while, life was good. Our little colonial filled with laughter, spilled juice, finger-painted masterpieces taped to the fridge. Martin worked long hours, but I told myself it was for us, for our future. When he came home exhausted, I'd make his favorite dinner, press my cheek against his chest, and whisper, "We're building something beautiful." But cracks always appear before the foundation collapses. At first, it was small things. His sighs when the kids were noisy during his calls, a sharp comment about dinner being too salty, the way his eyes glazed when I tried to tell him about my day. Then the absences grew. He missed Kimberly's first school play, blaming a client dinner. He forgot Eric's championship game, lost in a golf meeting with partners. By the time Sharon was born, it felt like he was already halfway out the door. I told myself it was stress, That partnership at the firm was competitive, that Martin was carrying the weight of providing for us. I repeated my mother's old mantra, marriage is work. You don't give up when things get hard. So I worked harder. I baked for school fundraisers. I stayed up late sewing Halloween costumes. I kissed scraped knees, balanced the budget, clipped coupons, and convinced myself that his distance was temporary. But the distance became a wall. I noticed the changes in the children before I admitted them to myself. Kimberly, my sensitive, artistic girl, started closing her bedroom door more often, retreating into sketchbooks filled with storm clouds and lonely faces. Eric, desperate for a father's approval he never got, threw himself into sports, staying at practice until coaches had to force him to go home. Sharon, my baby, started having nightmares, crawling into bed with me in the middle of the night. "Daddy seems mad all the time," she whispered once, her small hand clutching mine. I brushed her hair from her face and lied. "He's just tired, sweetheart." But the truth was, I had grown invisible in my own home. "Celeste, can you keep it down?" became Martin's most frequent phrase, tossed at me over the top of his laptop. When I tried to engage him, his responses were clipped, distracted. "Not now. I'm busy." When I wore a new dress or changed my hair, his eyes barely flickered. It was as if I'd become part of the furniture, useful, expected, but unremarkable. Looking back, maybe I should have seen it sooner. The late nights at the office, the mysterious perfume lingering on his suits, the way he flinched when the kids begged him to play, as if fatherhood were a burden instead of a privilege. But love makes you blind in the most dangerous ways. I told myself he was loyal, that he was sacrificing his presence now to build us a better tomorrow. I told myself that was love. The final months before my parents' deaths were the hardest. Mom's cancer worsened, and I spent nights at the hospital holding her hand, watching her fade. Dad sat by her side, their fingers intertwined, even as machines beeped around them. And Martin? "I'm not good with that stuff, Celeste. You handle it." So I handled it, alone. I sat in hospital chairs, fed Dad when grief made him forget to eat, juggled the kids' schedules, and planned funeral arrangements, all while Martin buried himself in work and excuses. I kept telling myself we could fix it, that somewhere behind the cold stranger who shared my bed was still the man who once danced with me barefoot in the kitchen, who used to bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. But even as I tried to hold on, I felt something slipping, like standing on the shore, watching a ship sail away no matter how hard you call after it. The night before the funeral, I found Martin at his desk, typing furiously. My eyes were red, swollen, my body heavy with exhaustion. I stood in the doorway, desperate. "Tomorrow is going to be really hard for me," I said softly. "Could you maybe put work aside and just be there?" He didn't even look up. "Celeste, I have deadlines. The world doesn't stop because your parents died." Your parents. Not our loss. Not my in-laws. Your parents. As though they were strangers. Not the people who had babysat his children, welcomed him to every holiday dinner, called him son. That's when I should have known. That's when I should have seen what was coming. But grief has a way of drowning you, making you grasp for anything that keeps you afloat, even if it's only driftwood. I wanted to believe he was still the man I had married. I wanted to believe love could conquer anything. I was wrong. And yet, a small ember glowed inside me that night, hidden beneath layers of denial. A voice whispering that love doesn't always conquer. It sometimes transforms into something much more dangerous. Something Martin would regret underestimating. The night before the funeral should have been sacred. Time to prepare myself for the hardest goodbye I'd ever face. Instead, it became the moment that carved a permanent scar into my heart. I remember standing in the doorway of our bedroom. The air smelled faintly of ink and coffee, and the glow of Martin's laptop bathed his face in cold blue light. He was typing furiously, his jaw set, his expression detached. For a second, I just watched him, trying to reconcile this man with the one I had once fallen in love with. "Martin," I said softly, my voice almost breaking, "tomorrow is going to be really hard for me. Could you maybe just put work aside? Just be there for me?" He didn't even lift his head. His fingers clicked against the keys, like I was invisible. "Celeste, I have deadlines. The world doesn't stop because your parents died." Your parents, not our loss, not my in-laws, just yours. The words sliced deeper than he knew. My parents had welcomed him into their lives like a son. They'd babysat our kids, prayed for his success, toasted to our marriage every holiday. They'd loved him unconditionally, and now he spoke of them like they were a burden, an inconvenience to his schedule. I should have seen it then, should have understood what those words meant, but grief blurred my vision. I clung to denial, telling myself he was just tired, just stressed, that the man I had once known was still somewhere inside the stranger before me. But deep down, an icy dread had already settled in my stomach. The morning of the funeral, I woke before dawn. The house was silent, except for the sound of Martin humming in the shower. Humming. My parents lay in caskets, and my husband was humming like it was any other day. I stumbled to the kitchen. Kimberly sat at the table in her black dress, spoon clinking against a bowl of untouched cereal, tears dripping into the milk. Eric stood stiff by the window in his too-small suit, shoulders squared like he thought strength could shield him from sorrow. Sharon sat in her booster seat, clutching her rabbit, her eyes wide and confused. "Why can't Grandma and Grandpa just wake up?" she asked for the 5th time that week. "Sometimes," I whispered, swallowing the lump in my throat, "people get so tired, they need to sleep forever." How do you explain death to an 8-year-old? How do you explain that the 2 people who loved her most besides me were gone forever? Martin came downstairs, adjusting his charcoal suit. He looked polished, immaculate, like he was heading to court, not to bury the only parents I'd ever had. He grabbed a piece of toast, eyes glued to his phone. "Martin," my voice cracked, "could you maybe help me with the kids this morning? This is really hard for them." He glanced up, annoyed. "What do you want me to do, Celeste? They're upset. It's normal. They'll get over it." Kimberly's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with a fury that was all my father's. "Get over it? They're our grandparents." "Kimberly, don't raise your voice at me." His tone was sharp, the same tone he used when she forgot to clean her room. "Why not?" she shouted back, voice cracking. "You don't even care that they're dead." Before I could stop her, she bolted upstairs, slamming her bedroom door so hard the walls shook. Martin sighed, shaking his head like she was being dramatic, like her grief was an inconvenience. "She's 16. She'll outgrow it." Something inside me twisted. "She just lost her grandparents, Martin. The only grandparents she really knew. Yours barely visit once a year. She adored mine. And you—" My voice cracked. "You can't even pretend to care?" He sighed again, long and weary, like a man forced to endure a nagging wife. "I care, Celeste. But falling apart won't bring them back. Someone has to keep it together." Keeping it together. That's what he called it. I called it abandonment. At the funeral service, the room was packed. Pastor Paul spoke about my parents' devotion, their 47 years together, the way they'd never once looked elsewhere for love. Listening to his words, I realized with a sick ache how far I had strayed from their example. They had shown me what loyalty looked like, and I had settled for scraps. Martin sat beside me, miles away. He checked his phone whenever he thought no one was looking. His thumb scrolled while my children wept, while I fought to hold myself together. When it came time for the burial, we gathered under the heavy sky at Greenwood Cemetery. The caskets lowered into the ground, ropes groaning, dirt cascading like muted thunder. Kimberly sobbed quietly. Eric's tears ran silently down his cheeks. Sharon clung to me, wailing for her grandma. And Martin? He stood slightly apart, checking the time on the watch I had once worked overtime to buy him. Something snapped inside me then. Not just grief, something darker. I realized I wasn't just losing my parents. I was losing the man I thought had vowed to love me, the life I thought we had built. And that's when he struck. Martin stepped closer, his hand resting on my shoulder for show. To everyone else, it looked like comfort, but his grip was cold, mechanical. He leaned down, lips brushing my ear. "I want a divorce, Celeste. It's over." The ground shifted beneath me. My knees buckled. My parents' coffins disappeared into the earth while my husband gutted me with 6 words. "What?" My voice cracked, barely audible. "You heard me." His tone was flat, calculated. "We'll discuss the details later. Try to keep it together for the kids." And then he pulled away, plastering on his courtroom smile as he shook my uncle's hand. To everyone else, he was the grieving son-in-law. To me, he was the executioner who had chosen the moment of maximum devastation to strike. Kimberly slipped her hand into mine. "Mom, you look like you're going to faint." I forced myself to breathe, in and out, like my mother had taught me during childhood panic attacks. "I'm okay, sweetheart," I whispered. "Just saying goodbye is hard." But I wasn't saying goodbye to just my parents anymore. I was saying goodbye to the woman I used to be. That woman died with them, lowered into the earth beside the two people who had shown me what love was supposed to look like. And in her place, something else began to rise. Something colder. Something Martin hadn't planned for. The ride home from the cemetery was suffocating. Sharon had cried herself to sleep in her car seat, her tiny hands still clutching the white rose she had wanted to lay on Grandma's casket. Kimberly stared out her window, earbuds in, but no music playing. I could tell from the silence. Her face was streaked with tears she was too proud to wipe away. Eric sat rigid in the middle seat, arms folded, staring straight ahead, his jaw tight with something that looked dangerously close to fury. And Martin? He drove with perfect posture, hands steady at 10 and 2, like this was just another routine commute. His eyes stayed fixed on the road, expression unreadable. He hadn't reached for my hand. He hadn't spoken a word. He looked like a chauffeur, not a husband, not a father. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the window and tried to keep breathing. The funeral, the burial, his whisper, it replayed in my head like a cruel film loop. I wanted to scream, to pound my fists against his chest, to demand why. But with the children in the car, all I could do was swallow the fire burning inside me. When we pulled into the driveway, the sight of our white colonial with its blue shutters hit me like a punch. Once, this house had been a symbol of promise, paint-stained summers, laughter on the porch, late-night dreams whispered under the stars. Now, it looked like a stage where a tragedy was unfolding, a place filled not with love, but with secrets. "Kids, go change out of your good clothes," I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled. "There's leftover casserole if you're hungry." They nodded silently, grateful for the distraction, and disappeared upstairs. Sharon carried her stuffed rabbit in one hand, dragging her shoes with the other. Kimberly didn't look back. Eric's footsteps were heavy, deliberate. The moment the last door shut upstairs, silence fell over the house like a heavy curtain. Martin loosened his tie and headed toward his home office. Of course, his refuge, his sanctuary, the place where work always came first. "Martin," my voice cut through the quiet, sharper than I intended. He stopped, hand on the banister, and turned. For a flicker of a moment, something almost human crossed his face. Guilt, hesitation, but it was gone in an instant. "We need to talk," I said. "Not now, Celeste. I have briefs to review." "Briefs?" My voice rose, brittle and shaking. "I just buried my parents, and you want a divorce, but you have briefs to review?" He shot a quick glance toward the staircase, as if worried the children might be listening. Always worried about appearances. Always worried about control. "Keep your voice down," he hissed, stepping closer. His tone dropped into that clipped lawyer's cadence he used in courtrooms. "Yes, we need to talk, but not when you're emotional, not with the kids around." Emotional, as if grief were a flaw, as if the collapse of my entire world was a tantrum to be managed. "When then?" I demanded. "Tomorrow? Next week? When exactly will it be convenient for you to destroy our family?" His jaw tightened, his gray eyes like steel. "Don't be dramatic, Celeste. This marriage hasn't worked in years. You know it. I know it. We're just going through the motions." "Going through the motions?" My voice cracked with disbelief. "Martin, I'm your wife. I'm the mother of your children. We've been together for nearly 20 years. 18 years of marriage," he corrected automatically, like the distinction mattered. The precision, the coldness, it shattered me all over again. "And you choose today, of all days, to throw it all away?" "I chose today because I knew you'd be too upset to make a scene," he said flatly. The honesty of it stunned me into silence. He didn't even pretend. He had calculated my devastation, chosen the moment my defenses were weakest. My parents' graves barely covered with soil, and he thought I wouldn't fight back. "You're a coward," I whispered. Something ugly flashed in his eyes. "Don't push me, Celeste. We both know this has been over for a long time. We'll handle custody, child support, all of it. Civilized." That word again. Civilized. As if his cruelty could be wrapped in politeness, made palatable by procedure. "You asked me for a divorce at my parents' funeral," I spat. "How exactly is that civilized?" "Keep it down," he warned again, glancing upward. But it was too late. The floorboards creaked above us. A door opened. Eric's voice, steady but trembling with anger, cut through the silence. "Are you really getting divorced?" I froze, my heart plummeting. He had heard. Eric stood at the top of the stairs, lanky frame silhouetted against the hallway light. His face was pale, his fists clenched at his sides. Behind him, Kimberly appeared, her eyes red, her chin quivering. Sharon peeked from her doorway, clutching her rabbit. Martin's face hardened. "This isn't the time, Eric. Go back to your room." "No," Eric said firmly, his voice breaking with the effort to hold steady. "I want to know. Are you leaving us?" Martin's tone shifted to that cool authority he used when disciplining the kids. "This is between your mother and me." "No, it's not!" Eric's voice cracked. He took a step down the stairs, his young body trembling with the force of his conviction. "We're your family, too. You don't get to blow us up and call it between you two." "Eric," I tried, but he shook his head, eyes blazing. "You told her you wanted a divorce at Grandpa and Grandma's funeral?" His voice trembled, but the accusation landed like a knife. "What kind of man does that?" Martin's jaw clenched, his hand tightening on the banister. "That's enough." Eric didn't back down. "You're supposed to protect us. You're supposed to protect Mom. But all you care about is your job and yourself. You don't even care that Grandma and Grandpa are dead. You don't even care about us." Silence swallowed the room. Kimberly was crying openly now. Sharon whimpered, pressing her rabbit to her face. My heart cracked wide open, watching my children bear wounds they shouldn't have to carry. "Go to your rooms," Martin ordered sharply. "No," Eric said again, this time more quietly, but with a strength that startled me. He turned to me, his eyes glistening. "Mom, don't let him do this. Don't let him leave us." Tears burned my eyes. I wanted to promise. I wanted to tell him everything would be okay, but the truth choked me. I didn't know what okay looked like anymore. Martin's voice cut like a blade. "Celeste, we'll finish this later. For now, put the children to bed." And then he turned, walking into his office, the door clicking shut like a verdict. The hallway was thick with silence. Kimberly wiped her cheeks and whispered, "Mom, please don't let him take us away." I gathered them all into my arms, Kimberly trembling, Eric burning with fury, Sharon sobbing softly into my chest. I couldn't give them the promise they wanted, not yet, but as I held their broken little bodies against mine, I made a silent vow. If Martin thought I would crumble, he had underestimated me. He hadn't just declared war on me, he had declared war on my children. And for them, I would fight. That night, the house carried a silence I had never heard before. Not the soft kind that settles after bedtime, but a brittle, fragile quiet that threatened to shatter with one wrong breath. I tucked Sharon into bed first. Her cheeks were still streaked with tears, her little rabbit clutched tight against her chest. She blinked up at me, her eyes wide and glassy. "Mommy," she whispered, "why was Daddy so mad? Did we do something bad?" The question sliced through me. I smoothed her hair back, kissed her forehead, and forced a smile I didn't feel. "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. Daddy and we just have some problems we need to work out." Her lip trembled. "But you still love each other, right? Like Grandma and Grandpa loved each other?" I froze. My mother's final moments flashed before me, her frail hand clinging to my father's, her voice whispering, "I'll wait for you." They had been each other's entire world until the very end. And now, my daughter was asking me if her parents' love had the same strength. I swallowed hard. "We both love you, Sharon. That will never change." She studied me for a long time, as though she sensed I hadn't really answered her question. Finally, she closed her eyes and curled closer to her rabbit. I stayed until her breathing evened out, then slipped from the room, carrying her unspoken fears with me. In the hallway, I found Kimberly waiting. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes red from crying. "Mom," she said, her voice low, "just tell me the truth. You and Dad, you're getting divorced, aren't you?" I hesitated. She was only 16, still my little girl in so many ways, but old enough to see through lies. "We're having problems," I admitted carefully. "Your father thinks—" "He doesn't think," she snapped, her voice cracked with anger. "He doesn't care. He missed my play. He forgot Eric's game. He barely looks at Sharon. And now—" She broke off, tears spilling fresh. "How could he do this? How could he tell you at the funeral? Who does that?" I pulled her into my arms, but she stiffened at first, her pride resisting comfort. When she finally gave in, she clung to me like she had as a little girl after nightmares. "Mom," she whispered, "please don't let him take us away from you." The thought of losing them to Martin's cold custody agreements made my blood run cold. I kissed her hair and whispered, "I won't. I promise I'll fight for you." Kimberly nodded, wiping her cheeks, and went to her room. Eric was waiting downstairs at the kitchen table, still in his suit, his tie tossed carelessly beside him. He stared at his untouched bowl of cereal, spoon clinking slowly as he pushed it around. When I sat down across from him, he looked up with eyes that burned too bright for a boy his age. "Why are you letting him do this, Mom?" The directness of his tone startled me. "Eric." "No, just tell me," he pressed. "He talks to you like you're nothing. He doesn't care about us. He doesn't even care about Grandma and Grandpa, and you just let him walk all over you." His words cut because they were true. I had let Martin's coldness swallow me for years, convincing myself it was temporary, that if I just tried harder, he'd come back. But now my son was calling me out with a courage I hadn't had. "I don't want to just let him, Eric," I said softly. "But this is complicated. There are lawyers and custody and money." "No, it's not complicated." His voice broke, but he held my gaze. "Either he loves us or he doesn't. Either he wants to stay or he doesn't. It's simple. It's just hard." Out of the mouths of babes, my 14-year-old had just put words to what I had been too afraid to face. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Promise me you'll fight for us. Please, don't let him win." I reached across the table and took his hand, gripping it tight. "I promise, Eric, I'll fight." Upstairs, I heard a door creak. Kimberly's voice carried faintly through the vent, her hushed whisper on the phone to her friend. "I think they're getting divorced," she said, her voice trembling. Dad slept in the guest room, and Mom looks like she's going to throw up every time she looks at him. What if they split up? What happens to Sharon? She already can't sleep without Mom. The pain in her voice nearly brought me to my knees. My children, my beautiful, innocent children, were already carrying burdens that should never have been theirs. The next morning, I found Sharon at the table, tracing circles on her placemat with her finger. Her eyes were swollen, her voice small. "Mommy, I had a dream that Daddy went away, like Grandma and Grandpa. Only he didn't get sick, he just left." My heart clenched. "Oh, baby." I pulled her into my lap. "Daddy isn't going anywhere." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but how could I shatter her world all at once? Later in the kitchen, Eric asked the question I'd been dreading. He stood in front of me, his young face set with determination. "Mom, are you and Dad getting divorced?" I hesitated, but he wouldn't let me dodge. "Just tell me the truth, Mom. I'm not a little kid." Looking at him, so much of Martin in his features but my father's honesty in his eyes, I realized he was right. He wasn't a little kid anymore. "We're having problems," I admitted. "Problems like you don't love each other anymore?" The bluntness of his words made me flinch. "It's complicated, Eric." "No, it's not," he shot back. "Either you do or you don't." His voice cracked, and he dropped his gaze. "I just want you to say our family is worth fighting for." I wanted to promise. I wanted to say yes, we're worth everything. But before I could answer, Martin walked into the kitchen in one of his expensive suits, briefcase in hand, as though nothing had happened. "Morning," he said curtly, pouring himself coffee. Eric stared at him with open contempt. "Really, Dad? You're just going to work? Like everything's normal?" "Everything is normal," Martin said coolly. "I have meetings." "No, it's not normal," Eric's voice rose, shaking with fury. "Mom just buried her parents yesterday, and you told her you want a divorce at the funeral. Nothing about this is normal." My breath caught. Eric had heard. Somehow, he had heard Martin's whispered betrayal at the graveside. Martin's jaw tightened. "That's between your mother and me." "No, it's not." Eric squared his shoulders, looking more like a man than a boy. "It's between all of us. We're your family too, remember?" The room went silent. Kimberly appeared in the doorway, eyes wet, Sharon peeking from behind her. My children weren't blind anymore. They weren't fooled by Martin's performance of control. They had seen the cracks, felt the coldness, heard the truth. And in that moment, I knew they would never forget. 3 days after the funeral, I went to my parents' house to begin the unbearable task of sorting through their belongings. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and wood polish, just as it had when I was a child. Every corner whispered memories. Dad's laughter echoing from the den, Mom humming in the kitchen, the sound of the old clock chiming in the hallway. I thought it would comfort me. Instead, it suffocated me. The rooms were too quiet now. The curtains hung still. The only movement came from dust motes drifting lazily through the sunlight. It felt wrong, obscene, to begin dismantling a life that had been so full just weeks ago. But someone had to do it, and like always, that someone was me. I started in the kitchen, pulling open drawers, stacking dishes, trying to focus on the practical. But grief has a way of ambushing you. My mother's apron still hung on the hook, her handwriting still scrawled across notepads by the fridge. On the counter sat her old recipe box, the one she'd guarded for years, as if it contained treasure. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. Inside, beneath the worn index cards of Sunday roast and Grandma's lemon pie, lay a manila envelope. My name was written across the front in her careful script. For Celeste, when you need to remember who you are. I froze. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. With shaking fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, dated just 2 weeks before she died, and a small brass key I didn't recognize. I unfolded the letter slowly, almost afraid of what her last words might be. My dearest daughter, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I pray that I was wrong about what I suspected. But knowing your stubborn heart, you're probably still making excuses for him, still believing that love can fix what was never really whole. I stopped breathing. The words burned across the page. She had known. Celeste, there are things you need to know, things I should have told you years ago, but I kept hoping I was mistaken. The key in this envelope opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank, box 847. Your father and I set it up years ago for the children's college funds, but when I noticed certain irregularities with Martin, I began keeping other things there as well. Evidence. Things that will hurt you, but also free you. Martin is not the man you think he is. He never was. You are stronger than you know, my darling girl. Don't let him convince you that you're nothing without him. You were everything before you met him, and you'll be everything long after. Fight for yourself. Fight for your children. But most of all, fight because you deserve better than the scraps he's been throwing you. With all my love, Mom. By the time I finished reading, my hands were trembling so badly the paper rattled. My mother had seen through Martin before I had. She had tried to warn me, and I had been too blind, too loyal, too desperate to keep our family intact to notice. I held the key in my palm. It was small, ordinary, but it felt heavy with consequence. I didn't want to know what it unlocked. I wasn't sure I could survive it. But my mother had trusted me with this truth. She had believed I was strong enough to face it, and if she could endure the slow cruelty of cancer while still worrying about me, the least I could do was honor her final wish. The next morning, I drove to First National Bank. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The key burned in my pocket like it had its own pulse. The clerk led me to a sterile little room and brought out the safety deposit box. When she left me alone with it, I sat staring at the metal lid, paralyzed. I wanted to throw the key away, pretend I had never found the letter, pretend Martin's betrayal was just coldness, neglect, something survivable. But I could hear Mom's voice in my head. You're stronger than you know. I slid the key into the lock. Inside was a thick folder, stuffed with photographs and documents. My stomach lurched as I opened it. The first photograph stopped my breath. Martin, standing outside Romano's, the very restaurant where he had once told me I was different. But he wasn't looking at me. He was holding another woman, kissing her like she was his world. She was blonde, striking, about 30. The timestamp on the photo, 18 months ago. My throat closed. 18 months. That meant he had been with her while I was at my mother's bedside, while I was holding Dad together, while I was managing our household alone. Photo after photo spilled out. Martin and the same woman entering a hotel together, leaving hours later, her hand resting on his chest as he laughed at something she said. They looked happy. He looked younger, freer, like the man I had once married, only he had saved that man for her. I turned to the documents, my hands shaking. Bank statements, withdrawals from our joint account that didn't match his salary, money missing from the college funds, deposits into a secret account in his name only. Then the credit card statements, charges from jewelry stores, thousands of dollars for diamond bracelets, pearl earrings, sapphire pendants. Not one of those gifts had been for me. There were hotel receipts, weekend trips to Aspen, Napa Valley, seaside bed and breakfasts, trips he'd told me we couldn't afford, vacations I had begged for but was told the budget was too tight, all while he was living a second life with her. At the bottom of the folder was a business card, Dakota Jensen, private investigator. Paper-clipped to it was a note in my mother's handwriting. Hired him 8 months ago after seeing Martin's car at the Marriott. Dakota is discreet and thorough. He has more evidence if you need it. I stared at the card until the letters blurred. My mother had known. She had hired a PI while I was busy defending Martin, while I was telling myself he was just stressed. She had carried this secret while fighting for her life, and she had died knowing her daughter was married to a liar. Tears blurred my vision, but beneath the grief, something else took root. Something colder, sharper. For 18 years, I had played by Martin's rules. I had believed his excuses, carried the weight of his absence, accepted the crumbs he threw me. But now I had proof. Every photograph, every receipt, every dollar stolen. It wasn't just betrayal, it was ammunition. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on the card. Dakota Jensen, a steady male voice answered. This is Celeste Harrington, I said, my voice strange to my own ears. You worked for my mother. A pause. His voice softened. Mrs. Harrington, I'm sorry about your mother. She was a remarkable woman. She thought you had more evidence, I said. My hand gripped the phone so tightly it hurt. How long has he been cheating? There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. The current affair has been ongoing for 2 years, but there were others before that. How many? At least 4 I can confirm, possibly more. My stomach turned. Most of our marriage. Not just recently, not just since things had soured. From the very beginning, Martin had been living a lie. I closed my eyes, the room spinning around me. And the money? Stolen from joint accounts. Diverted to private ones. Jewelry, travel, gifts, all for women who weren't you. I have full documentation, Mrs. Harrington. My mother's letter lay on the table beside me. Her final words glared back. Fight for yourself. Fight for your children. Don't let him convince you that you're nothing. I need it, I whispered. Every detail, every receipt. Can you help me? Yes, Dakota said. But Mrs. Harrington, may I ask, what are you planning to do with this information? I stared at the photographs scattered across the table. Martin's smiling face in every one. The man I thought I knew, revealed as a fraud. My voice was cold when I answered. I'm planning to stop being his victim, and I'm going to make him pay. The night after I spoke with Dakota, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the folder of photographs and statements tucked beneath my nightstand like a monster waiting to pounce. Each time I closed my eyes, the images returned. Martin laughing with her, Martin buying her jewelry, Martin stealing from our children's future to bankroll his secret life. And yet, what haunted me most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the realization that my mother had known. She had carried the truth while dying, too weak to confront me directly, but strong enough to leave a trail I couldn't ignore. Her voice echoed in my head. Fight for yourself. Fight for your children. The next morning, after dropping the kids at school, I called Dakota back. I need everything you've got, I said. Every piece of evidence. I don't care how ugly it is. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe outside the city, one of those places with cracked vinyl booths and the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. Dakota was waiting when I arrived. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, sharp eyes that looked like they missed nothing. Mrs. Harrington, he greeted me, standing politely. I brought everything. He slid a thick file across the table. The folder looked harmless, almost mundane, but I knew it contained the truth that would either break me or finally set me free. I opened it. The first pages were timelines, dates, locations, notes on Martin's movements. Then came more photographs. Martin with the blonde woman, Melissa Kane, Dakota explained, an attorney at a rival law firm. They'd met at a legal conference 2 years ago. Since then, their relationship had grown into something much more serious. This isn't just an affair, Dakota said, his voice low. It's a partnership. I frowned. What do you mean? He tapped the file. Melissa and Martin have been meeting clients outside his firm, preparing to leave and start their own practice together. He's not only been unfaithful to you, Mrs. Harrington, he's been betraying his own firm, siphoning off cases to build something new with her. I stared at him, my stomach twisting. It wasn't enough that Martin had gutted our marriage. He was dismantling his career, too. He's stealing clients? Yes, carefully, quietly. But there's a pattern. I've documented meetings, phone calls, financial transfers. They've already rented office space downtown. I'd say they plan to announce within the next 6 months. I flipped through the documents, my hands trembling. In one photo, Martin and Melissa sat across from a man I recognized as one of Mitchell & Associates' top clients. The timestamp showed. It was the same evening Martin had told me he was working late. The betrayal kept multiplying like cracks in glass. My husband hadn't just been lying about his heart. He'd been lying about everything. Mrs. Harrington, Dakota continued gently, there's more. Of course there was. He's been moving money, significant sums, into accounts Melissa has access to, not just from your joint savings, from client trust accounts at his firm. The words landed like a hammer. Client trust accounts? Isn't that illegal? Highly. If exposed, it's grounds for disbarment, even prison time, depending on the scale. My hands shook as I closed the file. So he's not just a cheater. He's a criminal. Dakota's eyes softened. I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrington. I know this is a lot to process. A bitter laugh escaped me. Processing ended when he whispered for a divorce at my parents' funeral. Now I'm just calculating. For the first time since all this began, I saw something flicker across Dakota's face. Respect. He leaned back, studying me. Most people in your position would collapse. You're already thinking about your next move. I have to, I said simply. I have 3 children depending on me, and Martin... My voice hardened. Martin thinks I'll roll over. He thinks I'll cry and beg and let him walk away with everything. But he's forgotten who I am. He's forgotten who raised me. I remembered my father's calloused hands, the way he had worked double shifts at the mill so we could go to college. I remembered my mother's quiet strength, how she had faced cancer with dignity, how even at her weakest she had been strong enough to see through Martin's lies. I'm my parents' daughter, I whispered. He should never have underestimated that. Dakota nodded slowly. Then you need a plan. Not just for divorce, but for survival. If Martin is willing to drain your accounts, betray his firm, and abandon his family for a new life, you can't afford to underestimate what he'll do next. The thought chilled me. Martin had already proven he would strike at my weakest moment. What would he do if he knew I held proof of his crimes? That night, back home, I tucked the children in and sat alone at the kitchen table, the file spread before me. Kimberly peeked in once, her eyes suspicious. Are you okay, Mom? Yes, sweetheart, I lied, sliding the papers into a folder. Just bills. She gave me a look that told me she didn't believe me, then disappeared upstairs. I stared at Martin's smiling face in the photos, the way he touched Melissa's arm, the way his eyes lit up for her, the way they hadn't for me in years. And then I looked at the bank statements, the missing money, the college funds that were supposed to secure Kimberly's art school, Eric's basketball dreams, Sharon's future. Money Martin had stolen to fund weekends with his mistress. The rage that had been simmering finally solidified into something sharper, something like steel. Martin thought he had chosen the perfect time to crush me at my parents' funeral when I was drowning in grief. He thought I'd be too broken to fight back. But grief wasn't weakness. Grief was fuel, and he had just handed me all the weapons I needed. That night, I whispered into the silence of my empty bedroom, You forgot who I am, Martin, but you're about to remember. A week after meeting Dakota, I sat alone in Martin's office for the first time in years. The room had always been off-limits, his private domain. He called it his sanctuary, a place for work and strategy, a fortress of polished mahogany and neat stacks of legal files. I used to bring him coffee and retreat quietly, respecting boundaries he insisted on. But now, as I sat in his leather chair, breathing in the faint scent of cologne and printer ink, I realized it hadn't been respect. It had been obedience. Not anymore. The computer screen glared at me, password protected. My heart pounded as I tried the obvious ones, our anniversary, the kids' birthdays. Nothing. Then I thought of Melissa. Hands trembling, I typed her name, Melissa Kane, 2019. The screen unlocked with a quiet chime. For a moment, I couldn't move. The simplicity of it was grotesque. 18 years of marriage, and the key to his secret world wasn't tied to his family, but to his mistress. Inside, his inbox was a minefield of betrayal. Emails from Melissa, flirtatious, intimate, written in the kind of tone he hadn't used with me in years. Plans for dinners, trips, late-night rendezvous in hotels. I skimmed one that made bile rise in my throat. I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore. You promised this year would be different. Scrolling further, I found attachments, billing records, client statements. At first they looked ordinary, filled with legal jargon. But then I saw the discrepancies Dakota had mentioned. Martin had billed clients for hours he hadn't worked, padded expenses, claimed travel that never happened. It was meticulous, deliberate fraud. And then there was a letter, handwritten on expensive stationery, tucked neatly into a scanned folder. My darling Martin, I can't keep waiting forever. I know you said the children need time, but I'm 34. I want a real marriage, a family of my own. You promised me Christmas. If you don't mean it, if you're just stringing me along like Jennifer said you did with her, then I need to know now. I love you, but I won't be your secret forever. Forever yours, Melissa. Jennifer. Another name. Another woman who had apparently seen through him. How many others had there been, tucked between the years of lies he had spun so easily? I printed everything, sliding pages into folders, my hands steady now, despite the sick ache in my chest. Every email, every receipt, every lie was no longer just betrayal. It was leverage. I was still sorting papers when I heard a car door slam outside. Panic surged through me. I shoved the documents back into place and closed the laptop just as footsteps approached the porch. But it was only the mailman. Relief left me weak, but also more cautious. Martin was a lawyer. He knew the value of evidence, the danger of discovery. If he suspected I was digging into his secrets, I didn't doubt he would act swiftly to protect himself. That night, when he came home, he was in high spirits. He kissed Sharon on the head, asked Eric about basketball, even complimented Kimberly's drawing pinned to the fridge. To an outsider, he looked like the picture of fatherhood. But when his eyes met mine across the kitchen, I saw something else. Satisfaction. Confidence. He thought he was in control, holding all the cards. He poured himself a glass of wine, loosened his tie, and leaned against the counter like a man who owned the world. "We'll need to talk soon, Celeste," he said lightly, "about how we'll divide things. I want this to be civilized." Civilized. That word again, cloaking cruelty in politeness. I smiled, keeping my voice calm. "Of course, Martin. Civilized." He didn't notice the steel in my tone. Later that night, when the children were asleep, I called Dakota again. "You were right," I told him. "He's been stealing from clients. I have proof." There was silence on the line. Then his voice, low and serious. "Mrs. Harrington, this isn't just infidelity anymore. This is criminal. If you expose this, he won't just lose his license. He'll go to prison." I glanced at the pile of documents spread across the table. "Good." Dakota hesitated. "I need to ask, are you prepared for what that means? For your children? For the fallout?" I thought of Kimberly's tearful whisper, "Don't let him take us away." Of Eric's furious plea, "Promise you'll fight for us." Of Sharon's small voice in the dark, "Daddy just left in my dream." "Yes," I said firmly, "I'm prepared. Because the only thing worse than the fallout is letting him keep destroying us." When I hung up, I walked through the quiet house, past the photographs on the walls, family vacations, birthdays, holidays, smiles that now felt like lies, past the children's bedrooms, where their soft breathing reminded me what was at stake. And finally to Martin's office, where the mahogany desk loomed like a monument to arrogance. I stood there in the dark, staring at the desk where he had planned his betrayals, where he had plotted a future without us. "You thought you buried me with my parents," I whispered into the empty room, "but you were wrong." For years, I had been the accommodating wife, the quiet mother, the woman who smoothed over cracks and swallowed her hurt. But that woman was gone. In her place stood someone sharper, someone who would use his lies against him, someone who would take everything he thought untouchable and burn it down. Martin had exposed his secret life to me without even realizing it, and now I was going to expose him to the world. It happened 2 nights later. The children were upstairs, the house was quiet, and Martin had just come home from working late. I had spent the entire day replaying what I'd seen on his computer, what Dakota had confirmed, what my mother had warned me about. The anger had been simmering so long it was almost calm now, a sharp, controlled burn. I waited for the perfect moment. Martin set down his briefcase, loosened his tie, and walked into the kitchen where I was finishing dinner. He looked immaculate, as always. To anyone else, he'd seem like the picture of success. Confident, polished, untouchable. "Smells good," he said, reaching for a glass. "What are we having?" "Lasagna," I replied evenly. "Your favorite." He smiled faintly, distracted, already pulling out his phone to check messages. Probably hers. Melissa. I dried my hands on a towel and reached into the folder I'd hidden in the drawer. Slowly, I placed a single photograph on the counter between us. Martin froze. The photo showed him and Melissa outside Romano's, laughing, his hand resting possessively on her back. The timestamp was clear. The same restaurant where he had once told me I was different. For the first time in years, I saw genuine shock flicker across his face. His mask slipped, just for a heartbeat. "Where did you get this?" His voice was sharp, defensive. I tilted my head. "Does it matter?" His jaw tightened. "Celeste, this is—" "Don't," I cut in. my voice calm but deadly. Don't you dare insult me with another lie. 2 years, Martin. 2 years you've been with her. While my mother was dying, while I was holding our family together, you were building a second life. He straightened his tie, regaining composure. This is exactly why I want the divorce. You've been spying on me, having me followed. Do you realize how invasive that is? I laughed bitterly. Invasive? You've been draining our accounts, stealing our children's future, sneaking around with your mistress, and you're worried about privacy? His eyes narrowed, calculating. You don't understand, Celeste. Relationships end. It happens. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be. Uglier? My voice sharpened. You whispered for a divorce while they were lowering my parents into the ground. You stole money meant for Kimberly's college, for Eric's future, for Sharon's security. You don't get to redefine ugly, Martin. You are ugly. He bristled, but his tone stayed low. Keep your voice down. The children don't need to hear this. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a whisper that cut sharper than any scream. You're worried about the children? Where was that concern when you emptied their college fund? Where was it when you missed every milestone to sit in hotel bars with her? Martin's phone buzzed on the counter. For a second, his eyes flicked to the screen. I caught a glimpse of the name, Melissa. Dinner's ready, I said, my tone laced with venom. Or are you meeting her tonight? His face went pale. How could you possibly... I know everything, Martin. I leaned closer, my voice steady, my eyes locked on his. Every dinner, every hotel, every dollar you've stolen. I know about Melissa. I know about the new firm you're building with her. I know about the client accounts you've been siphoning money from. His face went ashen. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. You thought I'd crumble, I whispered. You thought you could gut me at my weakest, leave me with nothing but grief, and walk away untouched. But you forgot something important. He stared at me, finally unnerved. What? You forgot who I am. He blinked. You're emotional. You're not thinking clearly. No, I shook my head. I'm thinking clearer than I have in years. I was my father's daughter before I was ever your wife, and he taught me one thing. When someone comes for your family, you don't beg. You fight. For the first time, Martin actually took a step back. He studied me like he was seeing me for the first time, not as the quiet wife he'd controlled, but as something he couldn't quite predict. What do you want, Celeste? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It was the question of a man used to negotiating, used to finding settlements. But this wasn't a negotiation. I smiled, and something in that expression must have unsettled him, because his eyes darted toward the door, toward escape. I want you to understand, I said quietly, that you made a mistake. You thought you could destroy me at my weakest moment. But you forgot. Grief doesn't break me. It sharpens me. Before he could answer, the sound of footsteps broke the tension. Sharon appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes, clutching her rabbit. Mommy? Daddy? Why are you talking so loud? Instantly, I forced my voice soft, the way mothers do. We're just talking about grown-up things, sweetheart. Are you hungry? Dinner's ready. Sharon nodded sleepily, and I guided her back toward the table. Martin stood frozen, caught between his wife, who knew too much, and the daughter who still thought he was a hero. He followed us to the dining room, sat down, and smiled at the children like nothing had happened. To them, he was still Daddy. To me, he was already a ghost. We ate dinner like a family one last time, the lasagna warm, the conversation forced. Kimberly talked about her English essay, Eric described practice, Sharon chattered about an art project, Martin laughed in all the right places, nodded at all the right moments. But I saw the tension in his jaw, the flicker of unease in his eyes. He was realizing, slowly, painfully, that I wasn't broken, that I wasn't going to let him win. And as I watched him sip his wine and pretend to be the man he used to be, I made another silent vow. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would not crumble. I would wait. I would calculate. And when the moment came, I would destroy him as effortlessly as he had tried to destroy me. The morning after our confrontation, Martin acted as if nothing had happened. He came downstairs in one of his tailored suits, kissed Sharon absently on the head, and announced he had an early meeting. His voice was smooth, practiced, perfectly ordinary. But I saw it, the flicker of tension around his eyes, the stiffness in his shoulders. He knew I had proof. He didn't know how much, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. That was exactly what I wanted. I smiled politely, poured his coffee, and wished him luck at his meeting. He didn't notice the steel behind my smile. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I made my first call. Mrs. Walsh's office, a crisp voice answered. This is Celeste Harrington. I need to schedule a consultation with Margaret Walsh. Today. Mrs. Walsh had a reputation that sent shivers through the legal community. She was ruthless, brilliant, and expensive. Exactly the kind of woman I needed in my corner. That afternoon, I sat across from her in a sunlit office lined with shelves of leather-bound casebooks. Walsh herself was tall, silver-haired, with sharp eyes that seemed to slice through pretense. "You've been married 18 years?" she asked, flipping through the notes I'd given her. "Yes," my voice shook slightly. "3 children, ages 16, 14, and 8. And your husband is a partner at Mitchell and Associates?" "For now," I said bitterly. Her eyes narrowed with interest. "For now?" I slid the folder across the table, the photographs, the bank statements, the emails. Her brow arched as she flipped through them, one page at a time. "This," she said finally, "is devastating evidence. You could secure custody, child support, spousal maintenance, a large share of the marital assets. And that's before we even consider the professional consequences." "I don't just want assets," I said quietly. "I want him exposed for what he is. I want him to feel as destroyed as he made me feel." Walsh leaned back, studying me. "Most wives come in here weeping, begging for mercy. You're different." I met her gaze steadily. He whispered for a divorce while they were lowering my parents into the ground. He calculated that moment because he thought I'd be too broken to fight back. He was wrong. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Good. Then you'll understand when I tell you we need patience. Timing is everything. If we strike too soon, he'll maneuver assets, hide evidence, paint you as unstable. We let him feel secure first, let him hang himself." I nodded. "That's exactly what I want." The plan began to take shape. Walsh would prepare the legal foundation. Dakota would continue surveillance, documenting every step Martin and Melissa took toward launching their new firm. And I would play my role, the grieving wife, overwhelmed but cooperative, willing to settle quietly. It wasn't easy. Each day felt like walking a tightrope. Martin grew bolder with Melissa, certain his new life was within reach. He spent more nights working late, came home smelling of cologne that wasn't mine, and left receipts in his pockets like breadcrumbs. I said nothing. I folded his shirts. I packed lunches for the kids. I smiled through clenched teeth. But in the silence of the night, when the children slept, I was building my arsenal. One evening, I tucked Sharon into bed and lingered in her room. She clutched her rabbit and whispered, "Mommy, promise me we'll always stay together, even if Daddy leaves." My throat tightened. "I promise, sweetheart. I'll always be here." Her small voice carried the weight of everything I was fighting for. Kimberly needed stability. Eric needed truth. Sharon needed safety. And I would give them all of it, even if it meant burning Martin's world to ash. Weeks passed. Dakota's updates painted the picture of a man sprinting toward his own destruction. Martin and Melissa met clients in secret. They filed incorporation papers. They signed a lease for sleek office space downtown. They posed as partners building a bright new future. Martin came home one night, flushed with excitement, pouring himself a glass of scotch. "Big things are coming, Celeste," he said smugly, as if I should be grateful. "Oh?" I asked mildly, folding laundry at the table. "What kind of things?" "You'll see," he said, smiling cryptically. "Just trust me." Trust. The word nearly made me choke. In his arrogance, he thought I was still the woman who waited for scraps of affection, who turned a blind eye to late nights and lies. He didn't realize that while he was plotting his escape, I was plotting his downfall. Mrs. Walsh called me into her office 3 weeks later. She spread out documents across the table. Bank transfers, shell accounts, proof of client theft. "With this," she said, "we can not only secure everything you're entitled to in the divorce, we can destroy his reputation. He'll be lucky to keep his license, let alone his freedom." I traced my fingers over the documents. Each one was a nail in his coffin. "When do we move?" I asked. "Not yet," Walsh cautioned. "We wait until he fully commits to this new firm. Let him announce it. Let him show the world his shiny new life. Then we take it all away." Patience. It was the hardest part, but also the most powerful. So I played my role to perfection. I let Martin believe I was cowed, compliant. I let him think he had broken me. When he suggested we handle things amicably, I nodded. When he dropped hints about moving out, I smiled weakly, as if resigned. Behind closed doors, though, I sharpened my weapons. Dakota's file grew thicker, Walsh's strategy grew airtight, and my resolve grew unshakable. The children saw more than I wanted, of course. Kimberly caught me once, late at night, staring at photographs of Martin and Melissa. She didn't say anything, just quietly placed a blanket over my shoulders and whispered, "We'll be okay, Mom." Eric grew quieter, but sharper. He watched his father with a suspicion that bordered on hatred. Once, after Martin brushed past him on the way out, Eric muttered, "One day, he's going to regret this." And Sharon, sweet Sharon, kept asking if Daddy was going away like Grandpa. Each time I hugged her tighter, hating that her childhood was being stolen by his selfishness. Finally, the day came. I opened the morning paper, and there it was, a smiling photo of Martin and Melissa cutting a ribbon in front of gleaming glass doors. Kane and Harrington, LLP, a new force in corporate law. They looked radiant, triumphant, victorious. I smiled, because I knew this was the peak, the height of their illusion, and soon it would be the beginning of their fall. The morning of the grand opening, I sat at our kitchen table sipping coffee while the city's legal journal lay open before me. The headline stretched across the page. Kane and Harrington LLP, the future of corporate litigation. There they were, Martin and Melissa, standing shoulder to shoulder with scissors in hand, cutting a ribbon in front of their gleaming new office. His smile was dazzling, hers radiant. To the world, they looked like a power couple on the rise. To me, they looked like lambs walking into slaughter. I clipped the article, slid it into a folder marked Final Stage, and picked up my phone. "Mrs. Walsh," I said when she answered, "it's time." By noon, the trap was in motion. Martin was served first. The process server walked right into the lobby of his brand new firm, passed the champagne flutes and congratulatory flowers, and handed him a stack of papers in front of clients and staff. Criminal charges for embezzlement, ethics violations, a divorce countersuit demanding full custody and spousal support, backed by mountains of evidence. Dakota was across the street with a telephoto lens. Later, he'd show me the photos. Martin's confident grin freezing into shock, Melissa's champagne glass trembling in her hand as color drained from her face. But it didn't end there. At 12:30, Robert Mitchell, the senior partner of Martin's old firm, received Dakota's full dossier. By 1:00 p.m., security guards were inside Kane and Harrington confiscating files, computers, and client lists under court order. At 1:15, Hartwell Industries, their biggest stolen client, received the same file. By 2:00, they'd terminated their contract and issued a public statement condemning unethical practices. By 2:30, the legal journal that had praised them that morning received an anonymous package of documents. By 4:00, reporters were preparing an emergency edition. At 5:00, news stations across the city flashed breaking bulletins. Prominent attorney accused of massive fraud. Kane and Harrington firm under investigation. Lawyer leaves wife at funeral, now faces prison. I watched the first news segment from my living room with the kids. Kimberly sat stiff on the couch. Eric clenched his fists. Sharon curled against me with wide, confused eyes. The anchor's voice was cool, professional, merciless. Sources confirm that Martin Harrington, recently departed from Mitchell & Associates, has been accused of siphoning client trust funds over a 3-year period. Allegations include embezzlement, fraud, and financial misconduct. His new partner, attorney Melissa Kane, is also under investigation. We are told a complaint has been filed with the State Bar Association, and federal authorities may soon become involved. Then came the kicker. Harrington's wife, Celeste, has filed for divorce and full custody of their 3 children, citing years of deception and financial misconduct. Eric turned to me, eyes blazing. "You did this, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Kimberly whispered, almost in awe. "You made him pay." Sharon's small voice broke the silence. "Is Daddy going to jail?" I hugged her tighter. "We'll let the courts decide, sweetheart. But no matter what happens, we'll be okay." The phone rang endlessly that evening. Reporters, friends, even distant relatives who had seen the news. I ignored them all. This night belonged to my children. We made popcorn. We watched a silly movie. We laughed louder than we had in months, the sound almost foreign in the house. But underneath, I felt the storm building. At 9 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text. "Martin, what have you done?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I deleted the message without replying. because the truth was simple. I hadn't done anything Martin hadn't done to himself. I had only lit the spotlight on his sins. By the next morning, the circus had arrived. News vans lined our street, cameras pointed at our windows, helicopters buzzed overhead. Kimberly peeked out the blinds, groaning. "Mom, everyone at school is going to know. It's everywhere." I cupped her face in my hands. "Let them know. None of this is your fault. None of it touches who you are." But she didn't look convinced. And Eric, my steady, angry boy, looked like he wanted to punch the world. "Eric," I said firmly, "anger won't protect us. Truth will, and now everyone knows the truth about him." By afternoon, Martin was summoned for questioning. Photos of him leaving the courthouse splashed across every news site. Gone was the confident smile. In its place, sweat, a clenched jaw, eyes darting like a man cornered. Melissa was pictured behind him, her perfect hair disheveled, her expression panicked. For all their planning, for all their arrogance, they had underestimated the power of exposure. That evening, when I tucked Sharon in, she whispered, "Mommy, is Daddy bad?" The innocence of the question nearly undid me. "No, baby," I said softly, stroking her hair. "Daddy made bad choices, but we don't have to make the same ones. We can choose better." She nodded sleepily, satisfied with the answer, but I lay awake for hours afterward, because the truth was harsher than anything I could tell her. Martin wasn't just a man who made bad choices. He was a man who thought he could destroy lives without consequence. And tonight, for the first time, he knew he was wrong. 6 months later, I sat in the gallery of a federal courtroom, my hands clenched in my lap, my children seated on either side of me. Martin stood before the judge, not in a tailored suit, but in an orange jumpsuit, shackled at the wrists. His once proud shoulders had slumped. His hair, once immaculately styled, was unkempt. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. "Mr. Harrington," the judge intoned, her voice sharp as a blade, "you have systematically betrayed the trust of your clients, your firm, and your family. You stole money meant to secure your children's futures. You used your position as an officer of the court to commit fraud, embezzlement, and theft over the course of years." Martin stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, his hands trembling despite his attempt to appear composed. "What makes your crimes especially egregious," the judge continued, "is the calculated nature of your deception. This was no lapse in judgment. This was deliberate, repeated misconduct. For these actions, this court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison." 8 years. The words hung in the air like a final nail in a coffin. Kimberly squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. Eric sat rigid, fury burning in his eyes. Sharon leaned against me, whispering, "Mommy, why is Daddy wearing those clothes?" I kissed the top of her head, my throat tight. Because when people break the rules this badly, they have to face the consequences. Melissa had already been sentenced. 3 years in minimum security, reduced for cooperation. She had thrown Martin to the wolves, painting herself as manipulated, naive, blinded by love. Maybe some of that was true, or maybe she was just smarter than him when it came to survival. Either way, Martin was left alone, his empire reduced to dust. As the bailiff led him away, shackles clinking, he glanced toward us. Our eyes met, just for a heartbeat. His expression wasn't apology. It wasn't regret. It was disbelief, as if he still couldn't fathom that the woman he had dismissed as weak had orchestrated his downfall. I held his gaze without flinching. Then I turned to my children, the only legacy that mattered. We walked out of that courtroom into bright spring sunlight. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. I shielded Sharon with my body, guided Eric and Kimberly through the crowd, and ignored every question. Inside, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. The financial recovery came quickly. Walsh and her team of forensic accountants had tracked every hidden account, every dollar Martin thought he'd concealed. The court awarded us restitution. The children's college funds were restored, our home secured. But the real victory wasn't money, it was freedom. 2 years later, I stood in the same kitchen where Martin once scrolled through his phone while our children begged for attention. Morning light streamed through the windows, golden and warm, illuminating a house that no longer felt heavy with secrets. Kimberly, now a sophomore at Northwestern, sat at the table sketching in her notebook. She was studying psychology, determined to help children of divorce. She looked up at me and smiled. "Mom, I'm proud of you. You showed me what it means to fight back." Eric, 17 now, bounded in sweaty from basketball practice. He was taller than Martin had ever been, broader too, but his eyes were kinder. Scouts from Duke were calling. He grabbed an apple, grinned, and kissed my cheek before dashing upstairs to shower. And Sharon, 10 years old, resilient, radiant, brought me a drawing she'd made. A picture of the four of us standing in front of our house, a rainbow stretching above us. In the picture, we were smiling. Whole, complete. I tacked it onto the fridge, right where Martin's smug Christmas card photos used to hang. That night, when the children were asleep, I sat in what used to be Martin's office. It was mine now, bookshelves filled with my graduate text, a desk stacked with counseling notes. I had gone back to school, finished my degree, and returned to the community center where I'd once worked. I spent my days helping women like me, women who had been lied to, diminished, betrayed. Women who needed someone to remind them that survival wasn't enough, that they could fight too. On the desk lay the journal I'd been keeping since the funeral. I opened to the first page where my handwriting was shaky, desperate. Martin asked for a divorce at my parents' funeral. I don't know how to survive this. I flipped to the newest page. My script was steady now. Kimberly told me today that she's proud of me. I think Mom and Dad would be proud too. Tears blurred my eyes, but they weren't from grief this time. They were from gratitude. My parents had taught me what real love looked like: sacrifice, devotion, endurance. Martin had taught me what love was not, and I had chosen whose lesson to carry forward. Martin was still in prison. His appeals had failed. Melissa had moved on, no longer returning his letters. His law license was gone. His name, once polished in Chicago's legal circles, was now shorthand for betrayal. And me? I was no longer the woman who stood broken at a graveside, clutching her children while her husband whispered poison. I was no longer the quiet wife who accepted crumbs, the woman who believed her worth depended on someone else's attention. I was something else entirely. I was my parents' daughter. I was my children's mother. I was Celeste Harrington, whole, scarred, stronger than I ever knew. As I closed the journal, I whispered into the quiet house. You thought you destroyed me, Martin, but all you did was set me free. And for the first time in years, I believed it with every part of me.